All right, here we go. Vivek Ramaswamy, welcome back to VladTV.
It's good to be on, man. Appreciate you having me again.
Yeah, our second interview.
That's right. And we have, the third time might be the charm for when we get in the same location.
I know.
We're getting closer.
I know. We keep missing each other. I was actually in New York when you were in New York, but then your schedule and my schedule just didn't work.
Scheduling is a complicated thing, but we will make that happen. But third time will be the charm, but second time we got still remote. So
there you go.
It's good.
There you go. Well, before we start, you have a new book called Truths.
Yes, I just released it this week, and it's called Truths, the Future of America First.
Right. And the caption around it is, the way we find our path to truth is through free speech and open debate, including with those who disagree with us. So the point of the book is to arm people at home with arguments to talk to their left-leaning friends, their left-leaning family members at the dinner table.
That's exactly right. And, I think the way we get our country back is by all of us starting to speak in the open again. We used to be the country where you could disagree like hell. I mean, seriously disagree with your friends or your family and still get together at the dinner table at the end of it. I think we have lost some element of that in our culture. And I think we're actually, ironically, more united if we're able to freely and comfortably disagree than to actually create silos that stop us from talking to the people who disagree with us. So that's what this book is about. And, I in many ways did it as a reaction to some of my experiences in the presidential campaign. Because in the presidential campaign, I had couple kinds of experiences in talking to especially, ideologues on the left. And some would be in the media and I would treat it as an exercise where I wanted to defeat them. Those were productive at times and you need to do some of that. But I think it's actually much better if you're not looking at that argument as one where you want to defeat or bury the person on the other side, but one where you actually want to convince them and bring them along. And so what I try to do in the book is give people at home a toolkit to be able to have conversations that they may not have the confidence to have, and it's actually contributing to our national division and distrust by people keeping their thoughts to themselves, as opposed to, without fear of cancellation, without fear of being made a pariah, actually being able to engage in open dialogue, which is what this country was founded on.
Well, you have a breakdown in the book with your 10 truths.
Yeah.
And I'll go ahead and list them. God is real. There are two genders. Human flourishing requires fossil fuels. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is no border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism lifts people from poverty. There are 3 branches of the U.S. government, not 4. The U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedoms in history.
Yes, those are my 10 truths in the campaign. And I've been vocal about that over the last year. And this book is based on that, though I add some small variations in content where a couple of the truths in the book, there's a few others like nationalism isn't a bad word. There's a couple of others, there's facts are not conspiracies. That's a chapter that I added in the book. But yes, those are the base 10 truths that you listed. That's the inspiration for the book. And then we go into some other subjects outside of those as well, like the areas I mentioned.
Well, let's talk about some of them. I agree with some of them. I disagree with others. Let's talk about the first one. God is real. You said believing in science and believing in God is not contradictory, but compatible. It's no coincidence that many of the greatest scientists in history believe in God. The Big Bang Theory is consistent with or even affirms the concept of creator because it suggests a definitive moment of creation from nothing. The fact that human beings across time and space share inherent concepts of right and wrong supports the idea that our ethical instincts are grounded in higher truths. And there's a few more. I don't necessarily agree with that. I was raised Jewish, but I don't necessarily believe in God. And when I interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an actual scientist, he said that through all his studies, he has yet to see an intelligent force essentially ruling the universe.
Mm-hmm. So science definitely can't prove the existence of God, but science definitely cannot disprove the existence of God either, right? Because science deals in the realm of what we actually know. And if God lies in the realm of that which we don't know, then science doesn't really answer the question of the why. It answers the question of the what. I say this as somebody who is a passionate follower of science myself. I studied molecular biology. I got my start in the biotech industry. So I appreciate the pursuit of truth through the empirical, scientific method, hypothesis-driven inquiry. But that only allows us to describe the world without the why. So one of the examples I quote in the book, is suppose instead this was my book, suppose this is a book of Shakespearean sonnets. And this is a thought experiment offered by somebody else, but I quoted in the book. And this actually person who I quote, to give credit to this person, is an atheist. And one of the things I love doing in this book is getting people who are able to articulate the other side. That means they really understand their own beliefs. But anyway, the irony is I'm quoting an atheist who actually gave a great argument that I find compelling for even the existence of at least the higher power. So say you're walking around in the forest, and in this world, nobody knows about the existence of Shakespeare. Nobody knows about the existence of even writers or authors. And you see a book of Shakespearean sonnets suddenly existing in the forest. And as a scientist, as an empiricist, you go in and you find certain patterns, and it takes a long time. You start to find the way these words are written. You may call it the law of iambic pentameter. That's the way that Shakespeare wrote his sonnets, five parts, sort of syllables. So you call that the law of iambic pentameter. Then you say there's these little dots at the end of these lines. We'll call that the law of periods. That still doesn't answer the question of why this existed in the first place. And so it'd be assuming, like, you walk into a forest, you assume this book just self-assembled itself. The trees fell down, self-assembled themselves into paper, and all of that was a natural accident, as opposed to the fact that there was actually an author who took those pieces of paper and actually wrote on them and created that book. And I just thought that was an interesting analogy where you could study this book of sonnets, and believe that you would know everything about it without answering the question of the why of why it came into existence. And if you didn't know that, that's not your fault, but that doesn't mean that what you see denies that there's something higher. And so this idea that science is incompatible with religion is really what I take on in that chapter of the book. And it's also no accident that maybe not Neil deGrasse Tyson, but many of the most accomplished scientists of the last several centuries have also ended up being believers in God. And even the originator of the Big Bang Theory was, the Big Bang Theory, accounting for the origin of the universe, was affiliated with the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was actually overjoyed when that theory of the Big Bang actually came out. There's even a version of this where Maoist China was disappointed by the existence of the Big Bang Theory, because that might actually give credence to God in a culture that was, by their standards, forcibly communist and atheist at its core. And so I think that, you're not going to convince somebody in one chapter who doesn't believe in God in a single chapter through the arguments I provide that God is real. This has been an ancient debate for most of human history. But what I do hope to convince people of in that chapter is that we would be more united as a people, as a country, if we did revive that conviction in a higher power. You can call that higher power what you want. You can call it God. You could call it the supreme being. You could call it a spiritualist view. But if most people in the country got to the point where we believe that there is a higher power that puts us here for a purpose, that we would be better off and more united as a country. To be clear, Vlad, and I think you know my view on this, I'm definitely clear about it in the book, that does not mean the government should be forcing that view down anybody's throat. Part of what makes America great is that you're free to practice whatever religion you want, if you want, and you're also free to be an atheist. So this has nothing to do with what the government is supposed to do intrusively in your life. But the irony is, you don't have governments going around punishing people for being atheists today, not in the United States. But what you do have is you have a system that actually penalizes people for their religious beliefs often as well. And I think that we need to restore that culture of religious freedom so people who are people of faith are able to practice their faith without criticism or the government impeding their ability to do so. You saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic. I could give you multiple other examples of where that's true. But I think if I ask myself, do I think our society would be stronger and better off if we revived that culture of people who believe in God being able to express themselves in an honest and authentic way? I do think we would actually be better off for it. And that's actually the main takeaway point from that chapter, rather than trying to make the case for deism over atheism, which is a debate as old as human beings are.
Well, yeah, I feel overall religion is a positive thing. I think a lot of good things have come from religion and churches, synagogues, temples, and so forth. But I think the whole purpose of religion is to bring some sort of, logic to what happens after you die, which, biologically, it's over. You're done. There is no heaven. There is no reincarnation. There is no afterlife. You're done. And
how do you know that? How do you know that?
Well, nobody really knows that, but there's really has been no evidence that something else happens after you die in terms of an afterlife. There's zero proof for an afterlife. There is a lot of proof that it's over. When your dog dies, when a plant dies, when a bug dies, it's over. We don't think that they're going to go to heaven and live in, any sort of extraterrestrial kind of plane afterwards. I think it only applies to humans with most people who are religious.
I think that I'll give you two perspectives on that. One is my perspective might be of interest to you because I'm a person of Hindu faith, different than the predominant faith in the United States of Christianity, although a lot of the values are the same.
So is that Hindu is reincarnation? Is that part of the faith or no?
Well, I mean, the philosophy is a lot deeper than that, because I was going to give you a view of modern physics. I think the Hindu view of spirituality and of the afterlife is actually not only deeply compatible with, it's almost a similar description of what modern physics has to say about the universe too. That there are particles that come together to create life. They dissipate back into the universe when gone. Mm-hmm. That effectively is a good statement of what the Hindu worldview is of that part of our theology and what our afterlife means too. That mass comes together to create life. It embodies the soul. The soul lives on, but the mass that comprises the body still goes back to be part of the universe afterwards. That's a religious take on what actually is a modern description of what you'd call a principle of the conservation of matter. There'd be a principle in chemistry or physics that says matter doesn't either come into existence or disappear. It just shows up in new forms. That is in some ways exactly a statement of the Hindu theology around the idea of life, death, and the path between one and the other. To take a step back, you made the point that there's no evidence of heaven. Well, evidence is one way of accessing knowledge. The scientific method is surely a useful method of accessing knowledge. I don't think it's the only method of accessing knowledge either, though. And I think that there are many paths to truth. The scientific method is one of those paths, certainly from my own faith that I was raised in. I think this is part of my Hindu worldview as well, is that there are many different faiths that lead to the path to truth as well. There's actually a famous quote from Gandhi that said, "It is the wish of every Hindu that somebody, that every person in the world at least finds God through one of the major world religions, even if it's not through Hinduism, but at least that idea that there is a higher truth and a higher power, that's something that all else equal, our society is better off if we create the space for that, rather than to say that we reject you as unsophisticated or that we reject you by saying that you have to do something that violates your religious conviction." I'll give you an example of that you have to officiate a wedding where you don't agree with the terms of that wedding because your faith stands in the middle. That's what the law is doing in many cases, and I don't think that that's good, even though I believe that everybody should be free to either practice or not practice, because that's the beauty of what the United States of America was founded on. What we really see today is a little bit of a cultural and even somewhat of a legal assault on that ability to practice your religion freely, and I don't think that's a net good development for us, and that's my main thesis in that chapter.
Okay, fair enough. We can agree to disagree on it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So on the positive effects, let's talk about deaths, right? If you care about the effects on humanity, here's a relevant attribute you might care about. What are human beings dying of, right? Human death rates are relatively, if you care about the flourishing and the life of human beings, you might care about what are the death rates. Well, here it turns out, and actually I draw from a good friend who wrote another book on this, Alex Epstein, 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures. Actually, this is Bjorn Lomborg, excuse me. 8 times as many people die of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. So if 8 times as many people are dying of cold temperatures than warm ones, but we're talking about a 1 degree Celsius increase in global surface temperatures, we're not even sure that's a net bad thing. It could be a good thing for humanity. Here's another fact. A lot of people aren't aware of this. The Earth, how old are you, Vlad, by the way? I'm 39. You're similar, right?
51.
Oh, okay. You look younger. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, back when we were in school, I think it was true for both of us, is they used to be really worried about the deforestation of the planet, right? The ungreening of the planet. Mm-hmm. Fun fact, the Earth is actually now more covered by green surface area than it was half a century ago. And the reason is carbon dioxide is plant food. Plants take in carbon dioxide. And plants also tend to grow in slightly warmer surface temperatures. So against the backdrop of all of these facts, back in the 70s, they used to be worried about an ice age. Now it's global warming. The reason they worried about an ice age is more people have died of ice ages in history than they ever have of warming. By the way, there was more of an ice age when there was higher carbon dioxide in the atmosphere a really long time ago. By the way, an increase in surface temperatures should actually predict less temperature-related deaths because way more people die of cold temperatures today. And by the way, the Earth is more covered by green surface area because of that carbon dioxide. I don't think it makes any sense whatsoever for us to be stopping the burning of fossil fuels. And by the way, selectively only in the West, but not in China, in the name of staving off global warming. Yes, that is why I say the climate change agenda is a hoax. And the people who are laughing at us at every step of the way, is actually the Chinese Communist Party that's benefiting from this. China burned more coal last year than they ever have in their history. We burned less coal than we ever have in our history. And that's why electricity costs, most people watching this probably know this from their electric bills, electricity costs, energy costs, overall costs, because inflation is driven by energy costs, are up in this country. We're flogging ourselves. China's laughing at us at every step. They actually have a word for it even in Mandarin. I don't know if you've heard this word, baitsuo. Have you heard that word?
No.
Baitsuo is a Mandarin word that refers to progressive white people in the West, and they use it to laugh at us. It's like a derisive term in Chinese. It's like these like stupid liberals, like sort of what the Soviets used to call the useful idiot. The Chinese version of that is this baitsuo, sort of the useful idiot liberal white person is what they're referring to, and they use it in a denigrating way. That's effectively what underlies watching us flog ourselves for fossil fuels while they're burning those same fossil fuels in an even dirtier way over there in the name of staving off global climate change, when in fact it's far from obvious that any of this is net bad for humanity overall anyway. So I know that was a long rant, but I think that tells you the kind of arguments I try to make in this book, which is to take the best arguments for the other side, stick to the facts. Are surface temperatures going up? Yes, I analyze that pretty clearly and come to that conclusion, but get to the punchline that maybe we don't get to in our siloed political discourse. And, that's a big part of why I hope people read the book.
You spoke at the RNC.
I did.
And I watched the speech again this morning, and you mentioned the deep state.
Yeah.
What is the deep state based on what you know?
Yeah. There's a whole chapter on this in the book. The title of that chapter may sound boring. It's the most important chapter in this book. The title of the chapter is, there are 3 branches of government, not 4. Okay? So the legislative branch is the branch that makes the laws. They write the laws in Congress. The executive branch is the branch that enforces the laws. That includes the president, includes prosecutors and police. The judicial branch is the branch that interprets the laws. And the way the United States of America is supposed to work is that those judges, the executives, the presidents, the police, the people who make the laws, they're separate. It's what we call separation of powers, and they check and balance one another. That's how we learned it in school, at least. Turns out that's not how it works. The branch of government that wields the most power is none of those 3. It's the 4th branch of government of unelected bureaucrats who are the ones who make the rules, they enforce the rules, and they even have their in-house judges that interpret the rules that are harming this country in pervasive ways. They're 3-letter agencies: FTC, SCC, FDA, EPA, TSA, God knows what. It's an alphabet soup of 4 million plus federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and then there's millions more at the state level, too, who were never elected to their positions, but are effectively writing laws that have the full effect of the force of law, but they call them rules or regulations. That's the deep state. The deep state is the people who we never elected to run the government, who are the ones who are actually running the government. And I think one of the ways we got to save our country is that we make sure once again the people we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run the government. And I don't think that should be controversial. It's one of the things I ran on for my campaign for U.S. president. It's one of the cases I make in this book. How do you fix that? Mass firings in the federal bureaucracy. Go fire 75% of the people. End some of these agencies that should not exist. Just shut them down. Devolve power back to the states and to the people. Rescind a lot of these regulations which never went through Congress in the first place. And that's the difference between living in a democracy and living in a monarchy. See, in England, in old world England, I should say, right? Pre-revolutionary England, they didn't have laws. They used to have edicts. You call something an edict where the person who makes a law, so what's an edict? Let's say I write something with the stroke of a pen and say that binds you from doing certain things. You have to behave in a certain way based on what I write with the stroke of a pen. In a democracy, you get to vote me out of power. In a monarchy or a technocracy, I get to write that as an edict and you have no say over the person who actually binds you. Well, in the United States of America, the whole premise was if somebody's making rules that bind you, that change the way you can live your life, then what you get in return is you get to fire them if you don't like what they actually do. Most of the people who write the rules that determine what you can and can't do in your life, you can't fire them. You can't vote them out of office. And it's one step worse than that. Not only can't you vote them out of office, even the people you vote into office, all the way up to a U.S. president, can't actually fire them. That's insane by American standards, by our founding fathers' standards. Yet that is exactly how it works in the U.S. federal government today, where you have these so-called civil servants, the bureaucrats, who historically have not even been able to be fired up to and including by a U.S. president who's democratically elected. I'm sorry, that's not a democracy. That is a new kind of monarchy. And that's the way it works in the United States today. And I am on a mission to change that. It's probably the most important issue that I care about. It's the most important chapter in this book. But one of the things I found, both in running my presidential campaign and even for talking to the publisher and others for this book, is they say that's boring. Right? People don't want to hear about the administrative state. Sounds like a boring word, like an academic word. And so what I try to do in this chapter of the book is to make that actually come to life with real world examples of how people have been harmed. And I hope people have a chance to arm themselves with that knowledge. And it's the kind of thing where once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's not a particularly partisan point. And you've had people who have leaned right in the past that have abused the levers of bureaucratic power, just as you have had, I think it's happened even more often with people on the left doing it. But whether you're on the left or the right, even if you and I disagree like hell on a bunch of issues, we should at least want to live in a country in the United States where the people we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run it, not the shadow government or what you call the deep state that's pulling the strings today.
Well, based on your definition, would you say that the Supreme Court is the deep state?
I would not, and here's why.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
They're not elected by the people.
Right. They interpret the laws, though.
And they have no term limits. They are there until they die. And you've seen this happen time and time again. So why would the Supreme Court not be the deep state? And do you support term limits on the Supreme Court?
So I don't support term limits on the Supreme Court because they're interpreting the law, and you want them. In the Constitution, it was written since day one that was a check and balance on the way the executive and the legislative branch work. That was designed to be a check on executive power and to be a check on Congress overreach. If you want to override the Supreme Court, here's how you do it. You pass a new law by people who you can elect to Congress. So that's the beauty of the system. If the Supreme Court interprets a law in a certain way, Congress can override them by just passing a new law. And who's Congress comprised of? It's comprised by the people who you and I get to elect. That's the beauty of our system. But what I have a problem with is when you have this unelected bureaucracy, where historically the thing they say is you can't even fire those bureaucrats. One of the things actually Donald Trump has taken a lot of criticism for from even the Harris camp in this campaign is that he wants to go fire those federal bureaucrats. They say you can't do that. Well, the irony is if the people we elect can't fire the people who are making the rules, then actually they're more like kings than they are democratically elected representatives. So that's where my issue is. It's a great counterargument, but I think that if you think about people who are interpreting the rules, if you don't like the way the Supreme Court's interpreted a law, then just you get to pass a new law through the people you elect. That's checks and balances. By the way, the U.S. president directly appoints each of those 9 justices with only the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate, who's also elected. In contrast to the 4 million people in the federal bureaucracy who nobody elected, weren't directly appointed by the president, weren't confirmed by the Senate, and most importantly, can't be fired by either the Senate, the Congress, or the U.S. presidency. That's the absence of accountability as we know it. That's what I'm against, and it's a great way to get to some of those distinctions we don't otherwise get to talk about.
Well, you live in Ohio.
That's right. I was born and raised here, too.
Right. Do you have any pets?
I don't.
Okay, so you're not worried about Haitians eating.
I take that back. Actually, my wife would take offense to that. We got like some fish. We got some slugs. We got some.
Yeah. Well, according to Trump,
we got a little aquarium upstairs.
Right,
yeah.
But according to Trump, the fish and the slugs are safe from the Haitians. They're only interested in cats and dogs.
I went to Springfield, right? And I spent a lot of time in Springfield growing up. You know, it's not some sort of just like, I just went there when this happened. I spent tons of time there growing up. I used to eat a tumbleweed off the highway, although that's since closed. There's a sub place called Mike and Rosie's. I've probably eaten there more times than most people who live in Springfield even today. There's a mall we used to go to. That one's now closed. I got family who live there. It's a near and dear place to my heart from my upbringing. I played tennis there every summer growing up at Wittenberg University. It's about 50 minutes from where I live right now. So I went there last week. I just posted on social media that we're coming. It's amazing. Hundreds of people showed up. It ended up being over 375 people show up there. Hundreds more waiting outside. 2,000 people wanted to come. People want to be heard, okay? Did I hear about cats and dogs? No. But what I did hear about was a woman, and I have no reason to doubt her. I don't think a mother makes this kind of story up about her daughter, said that her daughter, and this is live streamed at the time, right? I didn't know what to expect from this event. She takes the mic, she tells a story of her daughter being chased by a man with a machete out of a supermarket. She called the police and for 2 hours didn't get a real response, and they didn't even follow through with the investigation. So I think people are upset and they want to be heard. And I think that's fair game. I also met with Haitian migrants. And I think that having gone to the community, I don't want to just hear some biased perspectives from any angle. I met with city officials and I spent an hour with several Haitian community leaders. We actually built, I think, a really powerful bond, and we had some open dialogue that I think brought us together. Here's what I'll say. And this actually relates to one of the chapters of the book anyway, so we might as well talk about it. An open border is not a border. There are 20,000 Haitian migrants that were effectively dumped into a place like Springfield that was not prepared to absorb them in a town of 58,000 people, okay? That would be the equivalent of just saying 2 million people just showed up to New York City, which is where you are right now and where I was earlier this week. It's not anybody's fault. I don't blame any of the Haitians who showed up there. If we were in their position, we'd be doing the same thing. In fact, several of them had compelling stories. One of them was a man who was a doctor. I had a great conversation with him. He'd gone to medical school. He'd been through school for 8 years, just like you would, undergrad and then med school. He was a doctor, successful doctor, taking care of people in Haiti. And then these gangs repeatedly pester him, and not just pester him. When I say pester, it's not like they're calling him mean names. They kidnap him. They ask for ransom before he's able to get out and go back and live his life. And that becomes such a repeated threat that his only way out is leaving the country. He comes to this country. He's now in Springfield. He's a smart doctor. He has great knowledge. He would pass the USMLE. That's the test you have to take to get medical certification to practice as a doctor. Except they don't let him take the test in this country because they don't recognize Haitian medical schools. So he ends up going to nursing school, puts himself, pays out of pocket, working another side job to pay and go through nursing school to become a nurse at a time where we're short on primary care. That's a compelling American story right there, right? But that's also not necessarily representative of every migrant story, most of whom do depend on Medicaid and the welfare state at a time when welfare and Medicaid themselves are strained, not just in Springfield, but across the country. So my view is this, okay? First, we need to put an end to the illegal immigration, use our military on the southern border, put aquatic barriers in the Rio Grande, use technology to do it, deport people who enter this country illegally, reinstate remain in Mexico. If your case is being adjudicated and your claim is that you're seeking asylum, you got to have proof of it to get in this country. We shouldn't fund sanctuary cities with taxpayer dollars. That's fixing the illegal immigration crisis. And then as it relates to legal immigration, is there a good level of, can there be a good level of legal immigration? Of course. Are there legal immigrants who can make America a better country? Yes. I would know. I mean, I'm the kid of legal immigrants to this country who came here with no money, and I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. That's America. But if you're going to be an immigrant to this country and you're going to be reliant on the welfare state and you don't speak the language and you don't know the first thing about the civic ideals of the United States, then I don't think you should be allowed into the country through the legal immigration system either. And I don't mean that as a xenophobic or racist, none of that. It's what it means to actually say the citizens of this country get to determine what immigration policies best advance their own interests. So if you think about it like your body as an analogy, you think about your nation as a body, here's how I would frame the principles. So I'll give you the principles and then you tell me if you disagree. 3 principles for immigration policy. Using the analogy of a body, a nation as a body. No migration without consent. Consent should only be granted to migrants who benefit America, and those who enter without consent must be removed. I think those are pretty basic principles. And, we could talk about mass deportations, we could talk about building the wall, but when it boil it down, no migration without consent. Consent should only be granted to migrants who benefit America, and those who enter without consent must be removed. I think that's pretty reasonable. I think most Americans actually probably agree on that. And if we use that as our North Star and stick to that as principle, then I think our country is going to be stronger for it. And that's what I'm aiming to do, certainly with this chapter in the book, but even more importantly, with how we use that chapter in the book to translate that into real principled policy action in our country.
Look, I agree with you on that part. I'm an actual immigrant. I came over here when I was 5, and I have...
From Ukraine, was it? Or
Well, it was Russia at the time. It's now Ukraine.
Russia at the time.
Yeah, it was the
Now Ukraine, right?
USSR at the time.
I remember you and I spoke about that.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I've started a business. I've easily paid over $10 million in taxes over the course of my life. I employ, lots and lots of people. So yeah, I think that people should be allowed to immigrate, but I don't think it should be a free-for-all and open borders and so forth. I think that people need to apply. And if they get accepted, on the basis of what they can contribute, then yeah, they should be accepted because this ultimately is a nation built on immigrants. But yeah, I don't believe in open borders. I don't believe in what's happening in sanctuary cities and so forth. So me and you are on the same page when it comes to that.
And here's what I would say is, and I go a little bit further in the book here to just, what I'm about to say may sound a little controversial, but it is just stone cold hard fact. And sometimes it's the facts that hurt the most that we have to confront. So I raise this in the book, I make this argument, but I'll give you the short form of it here. You could imagine an immigration system that rewards somebody's willingness to work hard. Maybe it's just the hardest workers we let in. You could imagine an immigration system that rewards intelligence. Maybe it's just the most intelligent people we let in. You could imagine an immigration system that rewards love of country. The people who love the United States the most get in, or the ones who can speak English get in, or the ones that know the most about our civic history get in. You could imagine all of those systems. You could have an immigration system that selects for the kinds of people you want. Right now, we have none of those. The number one human attribute that our immigration system selects for today is your willingness to lie. Actually, it's dishonesty. No, that's a hard fact, because if you have somebody who's honest come into the country and say, I can't in good conscience tell you and put a signed sworn statement and check off the box of seeking asylum by telling you that I'm facing imminent risk of personal harm due to my religion or my race or some part of my identity in another country, which is the basis for seeking refugee status. I can't tell you that in good conscience. Well, if you don't say that, then you're not going to get in the country. But the people who are willing to say that are the ones who actually end up getting in. So we have an entire immigration system designed on rewarding the people who are willing to lie. Well, if that's the attribute you reward, then I do think you're going to have an adverse selection of the kind of people that get into the country. If your first act of entering the country breaks the law, then it shouldn't be surprising that you are more likely than an average person to break the law even further when you're already here. I told the story of one woman who came to the United States, I kid you not, fleeing persecution of Putin. She says there's anti-LGBTQ policies left a lesbian woman like her persecuted under Putin, and had a really sad tale of all that she had gone through in Russia to come here and seek asylum status. But then some strange things in the story started not adding up. And it turned out later when she was questioned about it, under even the slightest question, she just breaks down in tears. She's like, okay, I'm not gay. In fact, I don't even like gay people. I never have. And that ends up being the person who just says what they need to get in the country. So our immigration system right now rewards liars, as opposed to, you could say hard workers, you could say people who have great knowledge or willingness to love the country. None of those things is the basis. And I just don't think you're going to get a great outcome from a system that rewards those who are most willing to be dishonest. Yet that's exactly the system, Vlad, that we have today.
Well, as an Indian man, do you consider Kamala?
I'm an American. I don't mean to be. Right. I don't mean to be semantic, but it matters. It matters deeply to me. But I'm proud of my Indian American heritage, to be sure.
Okay, so
I'm American through and through.
That's absolutely fair. Let me rephrase that then. As a American man of Indian heritage, would you consider Kamala Harris the first Indian to run for president?
Well, I actually, as a point of fact, I don't think that's accurate. Bobby Jindal, I think, ran a while ago. I mean, there are probably others we could go through history of people of Indian descent to have done it. I certainly did it this year. She ran, I guess, in 2020. But regardless, I think the reason people have focused so much on her identity, on her ethnic identity, is that she has made identity politics a pretty important part of her worldview. You could say you like it or not like it. I'm not debating the merits of it. But when she turned around on the debate stage, remember this in 2020? She looked over at Joe Biden and says, this elaborate tale of a woman of color, a girl of color who faced difficulty in segregationist times, talked about the girl going on that bus. She says, I was that little girl. I mean, that was her moment running for U.S. president. So she has made this an essential part of her rise in American politics, not just for the presidency, but at every step of her way. So I think that she has drawn natural attention to, if she's made that a core part of her case for leadership, then I think she's naturally drawn a lot of scrutiny on that axis too. I prefer to debate far more on policy. What's the right vision for the future of the country? I think as a point of fact, she's not the first person of Indian descent to run in a major party primary for U.S. president.
Well, hold on a second. So You're right. There was Bobby Jindal and so forth, but she's the first official nominee of a major party to be running for president who is of Indian descent. That part is true.
I think that's a fact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I just want to point that out. You're right. There has
it's
been
not an opinion.
Lots of
fact.
people run in primaries and so forth, but to actually be the official candidate of either the Democrats or the Republicans, it's a pretty big deal.
Well, here's what I will say is I think I might have been the first to have ever gotten a primary vote for me.
Okay.
And I got primary votes in the Iowa caucus last year when I ran. And the thing about Kamala Harris is, say what you will. I mean, it's a Democratic Party. You believe in democracy, you would think. There's not a single Democrat in the person in the Democratic Party who last time or this time has casted one primary vote for Kamala Harris. Not one vote has ever been cast for Kamala Harris. More votes have been cast for me for U.S. president than have been cast for Kamala Harris for U.S. president. So anyway, it depends on where you're going with this, but I do think one of the interesting things about her candidacy, because he rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
That's a little bit of a gotcha because she became.
Well, it's not really.
She became the candidate because Biden stepped down. No one actually had to really vote for her in the same way.
But that's what people have a big issue with, right? Because last year I was on the debate stage. I made the prediction. People call me. I'm not kidding you. You could look this up. They say he's a conspiracy theorist when I said this. I was in the debate stage, looked the camera in the eye, and said, to the Democratic Party, I'd like to deliver a message. Can you just tell us who your nominee is going to be? Because we know it's not going to be Biden. They said that's such conspiracy theory. That's exactly what's played out. And it does feel a little bit undemocratic. As recently as May of this year, as recently as June of this year, Biden, Kamala, everybody said there's no chance that any other person than Biden is going to be the nominee. And then in July, right before the final sprint of the election, you get a swap out. I do think that a lot of people were left being rubbed the wrong way to say that's not a particularly democratic way of choosing who the nominee is going to be. It was done through a backroom deal, and it does feel a little bit like a sleight of hand. If you tell somebody for a year and a half you're not going to do something, and then you do that exact thing, I think it at least demands some scrutiny. In the same way that if you actually wear your identity on your sleeve and then somebody else asks a question about your identity, I think that's fair game. Now, my own style is I prefer this country's politics to be worked out through competing visions of policy. Like, we don't have to agree on everything, but different people have different visions of policy. That's how I like to roll. But in fairness, on the questions you're bringing up, was she somehow democratically anointed? She couldn't even make it to the Iowa caucus in her own party the last time she ran for president. This time around, it would have likely been the very similar outcome, but for the fact it was a backroom deal rather than the people of this country deciding to nominate her. But anyway, to your point, as a point of fact, was she nominated for U.S. president? Of course she was. We all know that. That's obvious.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you've accused her of sidelining her Indian identity and emphasizing her black heritage.
I've not accused her of that, no. But what I have said is when I was asked about this is, I do think a lot of, I mean, this is not me, don't shoot the messenger here, but it's true. And I think if you talk to other Indian Americans across the country, they would tell you the same thing, is I think a lot of Indian Americans have been somewhat disappointed in her reluctance, historically, to at least talk much more openly about the Indian side of her identity, or to lean into whichever one was convenient, at certain points in her political rise. But I'm not leveling those accusations at her. But when you say that in the past, I remember an interview where people asked me, well, what do you think about this controversy? I said, I'm not attacking her for identity, but I could tell you, don't shoot the messenger. I do think that it's a fact that there's a lot of Indian Americans out there who are somewhat disappointed in her.
Since our last interview, I interviewed Martin Shkreli. And he said you were an investor in his early company.
My fund that I worked for was an investor in this public company that he was a CEO of called, it was Retrofin. Yeah. He's an interesting guy. I wrote about him in my first book, Woke Inc. He's definitely, a lot of people say what they will about him. He at least has an encyclopedic knowledge of different diseases. But I remembered I probably invested in hundreds of companies during my time as a biotech investor at the hedge fund where I worked for 7 years in New York. And he was one of the more interesting CEOs, I remember. He'd meet with, probably take about 10 of these meetings a day. And, most of them are just, square, same sort of, stuffed suit. This guy was different. He was interesting. And it was certainly, one of the many investments that I made and followed during my 2007 to 2014 period.
Yeah, very smart guy. I was actually extremely impressed with our interview.
He knows a lot. He has an encyclopedic kind of knowledge about diseases. I will say that's one of the things that stood out to him. Most biotech CEOs don't really know much about outside of their own talking points. It's kind of like politicians, actually. Right? They come to these investor meetings with their talking points about their own unique drug or their own unique disease area, but they don't really know much about, other areas outside of it. And, every person has their flaws and his have been well documented and well known.
Right.
But I remember when we had that first meeting, I was like, oh, this guy's definitely a little bit different than the others in terms of at least his knowledge of different disease areas and being self-taught despite not being a doctor. And I thought that was interesting for sure.
Well, you also acquired 7.7% of Buzzfeed.
Yeah. Number maybe a little higher than that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, what's the percentage?
I think you could look it up right now. It's probably over 8%. Yeah.
Okay.
Follow whatever the latest public filings say. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I was actually partnered up with Complex for a long time. And Complex,
oh, nice.
Yeah, Complex handled all of our advertisements on both the website and my YouTube channel. So essentially, they were an MCN. So the YouTube money would go through Complex. They would add a certain amount of money in terms of premium ads. Then they would pay me out after a certain number of months. After BuzzFeed took over and BuzzFeed went public, they actually stopped paying me to the tune of millions of dollars, essentially. And we actually had to sue them for the payment. And right around the time that they sold Complex, they settled with me for $50,000 less than they actually owed me.
Huh.
So, with the 8% that you own right now, you owe me about $4,000. I'm gonna put that out there.
Well, I'm a shareholder, passive shareholder of the company. I became a shareholder earlier this year.
Right.
But as you probably know, I know you're just sort of
I'm not actually expecting the money. I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah.
But I will tell you probably noticed that I became not only a large shareholder, I'm the second largest outside shareholder of BuzzFeed, but also became an activist shareholder, pointing to what I think some of the things were that the company did that lost its way over the years. And I've had some productive interactions with the company. But my view is that there is potential there, but that potential requires some major changes in strategy and articulating that change in strategy and acting according to it pretty clearly in ways that I have laid out in my public letter to the company's board and to the company in some meetings I've had with them afterwards.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, because it wasn't just me. It was a bunch of big YouTubers that were basically waiting on their money from BuzzFeed, and they were holding on to it. And it was really just scumbag behavior. I could imagine if they didn't get the money and they're saying, listen, we're not getting the money, so we can't pay you yet. They actually got the money from Google, held on to it to pay off their various expenses, and didn't pay me and a whole bunch of other people. And when they finally paid me, they settled for $50,000 less. And at the time I took it because I was worried that they might go bankrupt and I might get nothing. So, I personally think that the CEO of BuzzFeed is a piece of garbage. And hopefully with you being, an 8% shareholder, you could change that, because I'm still pissed off about that.
Well, I appreciate the feedback. And what I'll tell you is you can read my letter as an activist investor there. I'm clearly there with a hope of shaking things up for the better. But stay tuned and we'll see what I'll leave it at that for now. But you can track what's going on publicly there, and we'll see how that all plays out.
At this point, it is what it is. I've already settled with them. The money's gone. I just felt
I didn't know you had that affiliation though, and it's kind of an interesting line of business where so much has changed because the way these social media platforms have worked have completely changed the success factors of these businesses, right? Because it used to be that through Facebook-driven traffic, you could build an entire business on the back of that. Mm-hmm. When that environment changed, when Facebook changed the way that it's allowing publishers of content to be able to actually drive traffic using Facebook, boy, it became a lot harder of a line of business to be in. And then Google became the primary driver of driving search traffic, but now Google is moving to clickless search, where using AI can effectively, without even clicking on it, which is actually what drives the ad traffic or the revenue, now without even clicking on it, most users are able to get what they need without actually driving that type of revenue. That's good for the Googles and the Facebooks. It's made it a lot harder for publishers of content. And so my view is you need to think big about strategic reframes. You can't just be rearranging deck chairs on the back of the Titanic as it sinks. You need to be thinking about actually rebuilding the new Titanic. And, I think that creates major opportunities for people who are willing to be bold. People are especially be willing to be bold with a brand. Historically, it used to be that a media conglomerate, there could be many efficiencies of scale or whatever from being a conglomerate. Right now, if you're going to have a conglomerate media, I think the number one thing you need is a distinctive brand that defines who you are, what you stand for. So every employee, every customer, every user, every advertiser knows exactly what they're getting with you rather than with somebody else. Because if it weren't for that, you have an independent content creator economy anyway on the modern internet where you don't need the conglomerate brand.
Right.
But if you're going to have a conglomerate brand, if you're going to have a conglomerate, it better darn well have a distinctive brand. So from a business perspective, that'd be my view. My background was in biotech, as you well know, but taking some of those lessons I think it's interesting when you take experiences in one industry and sometimes transfer them to another. On one hand, you need to build up your knowledge in that industry. On the other hand, you can bring a fresh perspective that can often be used to shake things up too.
Well, yeah, just the media business is very, very different and very tough these days. We actually shut down the news part of our company after 15 years because we saw that more and more people were actually getting all their news on Instagram. Right there, the video's there, the caption is there. You don't have to click anywhere. You don't have to see any ads. It's all right there for you, and it's all free. So, having a staff of writers creating, original content and content that's sourced from other sources, it just wasn't a profitable business as time progressed. So we shut it down. And when you look at it from kind of a bird's eye view, TMZ sold for $50 million, which is unbelievably low. Unbelievably low. My jaw dropped. I'm like,
that's surprising. Yeah,
only 50 million for something as big as TMZ, which has a TV presence on top of it. So yeah, I think that there was sort of a golden era when Arianna Huffington sold the Huffington Post, and people are paying hundreds of millions of dollars for these media companies. I think these days it's a much, much tougher business. So good luck with that. I personally, I don't think I would have bought a piece of BuzzFeed myself.
Well, I think it's a company that's obviously down a lot since when it went public.
Yeah.
I think that there is an opportunity, obviously, has some debt that it's taken on. So are there some serious risks that the company faces? Absolutely. But is the company also massively down in the price relative to when it went public? Yes, it is. And do I see an opportunity, if the right kinds of strategic shifts are made, to create a lot of value? Yeah, that was my whole premise for the activist investment. But I think it will require the company to make some serious changes in the way that it thinks about its future.
Well, isn't one of the things that you're trying to do is actually get more conservative commentators on BuzzFeed?
Well, one of the suggestions I made is you got to have a distinctive brand, okay? Brand is everything if you're going to have a conglomerate. And so one idea of a distinctive brand could be actually people who are talking to each other with diverse voices. That doesn't exist in the media landscape today. I don't think there's a conglomerate today. You have a lot of right-wing and left-wing media. You don't have a conglomerate today that says, okay, we're going to get really distinctive voices across the different cultural or political spectrum or any spectrum, even in sports or otherwise, that are actually talking directly with, debating with one another. I don't think you have that anywhere other than internet platforms. But the problem with the internet platforms is that there's no quality filter, right? Anybody, high quality or low quality, can show up. And the beauty, I'm grateful for places like X where it's unfiltered free speech. I think that's good. You have competitors to YouTube like Rumble that are doing this, but there's no real quality filter, but anybody can do it. That's a true creator economy play. You have publishers of content, you have big media companies that apply quality filters, but they also apply ideological filters such that you don't actually have good crosstalk, but you have one type of, ideological content you can get with a quality filter. I think there's a massive opportunity for somebody to pursue to say, okay, we're going to be a publisher of content, not a platform, with a quality filter, but without the ideological filter. So you're actually getting high quality but diverse voices interacting with, talking to each other, cross-pollinating audiences. I think it's good for the country, actually. That doesn't exist today. I think that would actually help unite our country and our culture. It doesn't exist. I believe in capitalism and the opportunity for capitalism in the private sector to solve some of the problems that government can't or shouldn't solve. And this is one of those areas where I see that opportunity for sure.
Well, I'll check back with you in a year or so to see how your investment is going.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Well, I just interviewed Don Lemon.
Okay.
And I mentioned how, your comments about when he got fired and how, you essentially said, you're happy that he got fired and so forth based on the back and forth that you guys had. And his response was, it's disappointing that someone would celebrate someone losing their job.
How nice is that for someone to say that? I don't care who you are. I'm never. I
don't agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't agree with that.
That says a lot about his character and who he is. But by the way, technically, I did not get fired. I'm still under contract with CNN.
Well, look, I was not celebrating, but what I asked, do I think it was a good thing when you have a host, supposedly of a news program, actually creating a one-sided view of what his audience says? If that's aligned with the mission of your organization, then he'd be a great employee. But if your mission of your organization is to educate your audiences, then I don't think he'd be a good employee. So I don't celebrate anything bad individually happening to anybody. But I do think it's a good thing when an organization has a clear mission and then it makes decisions that are aligned with that mission. CNN had hired a new CEO at the time. And their stated purpose was to say that even though they've catered historically to left-wing audiences, that they want to expand the aperture by inviting new viewpoints on. Well, if they invite somebody with a new viewpoint on the show, but you have a host who's working for you, one of your main anchors, supposedly in the name of providing news and educating audiences, that goes out of his way to make sure that that audience does not hear that new view that they supposedly invited on their program, I don't think that was aligned with the direction of the mission of where CNN said they wanted to go. And so they made the decision they had to make. So I think that's actually an example of good executive leadership. If it doesn't align with your mission, then you can't have somebody who's in a senior role at an organization if they're unaligned with your mission. That's what I said. And so I'm not celebrating, something bad. I don't want anything bad to happen to anybody in their own life. I would love for every person to live the most fulfilling and flourishing vision of what their own journey is. But if you're in an organization where your behaviors clash with what the stated mission of that organization is, then there's got to be a change. As it relates to his next phase of his career, I wish him nothing but the best. And I also think that here's what's true about all of us as human beings. It's probably true of you and me, and it's probably true of Don Lemon, is that we all evolve as a product of our experiences. And so to the extent that being in a new non-corporate environment causes him to evolve, or that whole experience is something that he's able to take something useful from, learn from, I would love for nothing more than for a guy like that to have a renaissance in breaking through to a different kind of journalism that didn't exist in the past. I wish nothing but success upon somebody who's striking his own way on an independent journey. But, that's really what I believe. And it was obviously deeply personal, so I'm not going to fault him for, reading into that in a very personal way. He certainly took some of my comments very personally when we faced off on air. I'm going to try to remember the exact quote that he told me to my face, which I thought was a little disappointing. I think he said, he said, look, you can disagree with me when you have black skin like I do, or whatever. The irony is our skin shades actually are pretty similar, but put that to one side. It was the unwillingness to engage in a debate when he got out of his depth about knowing about a particular part of U.S. history that I was talking about, which is the way in which Second Amendment rights were extended to black Americans after the Civil War, which is an important story that was used to actually suppress the rights of black Americans for a really long time. And I think that really pushed up against his own desired or understanding narrative of American history. But rather than engaging in dialogue like you and I are, he ended up becoming irate. He screamed at his producers in his ear, and it just became, it wasn't a pretty incident. And I think CNN made the decision they had to make after that. But that doesn't mean I wish him poorly or want to dunk on him, or, I think that's one of the things I learned from the campaign too, is I would sooner, and I'm not saying this to just, promote my book or whatever, but I'm launching the book this week, but it's also why I wrote the book, is in the presidential campaign, I had some experiences where we had some definite confrontations with people on the left or others who would disagree with me. And sometimes if it's a high profile figure, you are in a little bit of a battle and you got to defeat them. And a few times I did do that. And maybe that happened in my interaction with Don Lemon. But my favorite interactions weren't those, actually. My favorite interactions were where we were actually where I was able to disagree but engage with people who we were able to persuade in some way. And occasionally it would happen the other way, where at least it would open my eyes to a perspective that I didn't have before I visited the south side of Chicago or went to Kensington in the inner city of Philadelphia, both of which I did during my campaign as well. And that's, I think, our country at its best. And so that's certainly the best parts of the presidential campaign that I ran last year. Those are some of my best memories. It's also what I'm hoping to achieve with this book, is I don't want this book to just be read by a bunch of conservatives who already agree with me. I'd rather this book be read by people who may disagree, or at least think they disagree with what a lot of my views are, but read it anyway. And one of the things I hope people realize when they read this is I went out of my way, at least did my very best, to make sure we're articulating the best arguments for the other side. Not some straw man argument that you can dunk on, but like actually the best possible argument for the other side. Like when you and I talked about the chapter on God, I'm quoting some of the atheists who I respect the most for their arguments against the existence of God. On the climate change chapter, we go into depth on looking at the temperature data, and where I land is global surface temperatures are going up, but there's a different question we got to be asking. So that's something I try to do. I actually, even in the chapter about transgender ideology and the There Are Two Genders is the title of the chapter, I talk about a relationship my wife and I built over the course of the last year with actually one of the reporters who was following our campaign around. She was a press embed in every campaign has a bunch of press from each network. And it turned out that she was actually somebody who identified as non-binary herself, and the conversations we had on a deeply personal level as we're traveling on a bus across different states in Iowa, different states like Iowa and New Hampshire. That's also something I talk about in this book, is the personal dimensions of some of those experiences as well. And so the goal isn't to defeat, the goal is hopefully to persuade. And I think that's how we get our country back.
Well, one of my YouTube members, the Corner 3673, actually brought up a very interesting question. What happens is I have, like a paid section on my YouTube channel where people can actually subscribe and get interviews early. And they have a forum, a community, which is only accessible to members. So sometimes I'll say, hey, I'm having so-and-so on my show. What should I ask them? And they'll propose certain questions. So this guy, the Corner 3673, actually had a very interesting question. He said, why don't you turn Democrat? Your message would reach a lot more people and you'd get more votes the next time around. The conservative community compares you to Obama in a negative way.
So look, I think the two-party system is in some ways, it's just another form of artificial identity. I think the real divide in the country is not between Republicans and Democrats. It's between the managerial class and the everyday citizen. I think the things that would make it very, I think it just wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't have ever made sense. And a lot of people ask me this question is, look, I believe in the importance of small government. I believe in the importance of shutting down federal bureaucracy. I believe in the importance of just meritocracy. I reject equity of outcomes, but I embrace equality of opportunity. Has the Republican Party been perfect or even good on the question of really advancing equality of opportunity? You could make the argument the answer to that's no, but the Democratic Party, at least the modern version of it, is too focused on equity of outcome in a way that's not aligned with my core philosophy either. So I think of myself as somebody who's pro-American. I said this when I was running for U.S. president as a Republican. I was using the Republican Party as a vehicle to advance my agenda. I said that to Republicans and to the Republican Party itself, because I believe in that level of candor and honesty. But you've now seen a guy who ran, for Democrat U.S. president that became an independent that's now supporting Donald Trump. It's RFK. You've got Tulsi Gabbard. She switched parties. You've got other people like Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney that have gone the other way. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing a lot of two-way traffic right now, which tells you that the real divide isn't between traditional Republican and Democrat anyway, but between this kind of bureaucratic managerial class and the everyday citizen. And I'm on the side of representing the voice of the citizen. And, put whatever label on that you want. I call that pro-American.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a chance, not that there's any plan, but there is a chance that at one point you might actually run as a Democrat.
I don't see that happening because I think if the Democratic Party ended up being, if Party X, right, just like Party Z, okay, ends up emerging where that party is exclusively dedicated to reviving meritocracy in America, standing for free speech as an absolutist principle that you believe all opinions are fair game to express, that stands for the rule of law, that stands for standing against illegal immigration while embracing legal immigration at the same time, that stands for reviving national pride in the country, standing for our veterans without apology, standing for the national character of the United States, sensible approaches to voting, like making Election Day a holiday in a way that unites Americans, then yes, that's what I'm all in for. It's just that today I truly believe that the Republican Party can be that party, and that's why I've been looking to play a leading role. Last year, the leading role is what I was aspiring to, but in the future, a leading role in shaping the Republican Party to be the party that represents those principles I just laid out. I think there are currently, and the person who asked the question may disagree, but currently I believe is the party that is much closer to best expressing those ideals. And also, crucially, here's a big one for me, staying out of World War III in the process, okay? Staying out of foreign interventionism for its own sake. In that context, right now, I think the Republican Party is closest, not perfect. You have a lot of Republicans that favor that foreign interventionism too, but the Republican Party that is the one that is closest to embodying those ideals. And in the context of a two-party system, that's exactly why I chose to run and will likely continue to choose to run as a Republican, but it's as a vehicle for advancing this pro-American agenda that I actually care about.
Well, when you look at our last interview, the clips that got the most views were the ones about money. It was the ones about you making your first million, the difference.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah, the difference between being a millionaire and a billionaire and so forth. Because people are interested in that. We've also, I've also pushed stock investment and financial literacy on my platform for many years. So I think that's probably part of the reason. Now, if you were 18 and you had no money and you had to start over right now in 2024, how would you get rich?
It's a good question. I want to think about that because I want to give you a good answer. So you have no money and you're 18 years old right now graduating. Correct. And you want to make it big. How do you do it? So I'll give you a high-level answer, and then let me give you even some specifics. High-level answer is identify what's out of favor and then start running right there. Okay, so what's not popular, okay? I mean, there's an AI revolution. That's hot. Okay, if that's already been talked about and you're not into it, you're even hearing about it, that means that's probably not the place where there's opportunity for you. So identify what's not hot, and then ask yourself, where do you have unique attributes that allow you to do something that somebody else can't do? Find the union of those two things, something that's out of favor, but an area where you have unique talents that somebody else doesn't, and then be patient. You got to have enough or be able to raise enough cash to be able to stay out of bankruptcy until the tide actually turns in your favor. Now I'll get specific, right? I think that there is some areas in the stock market that fit that description right now. I think there are a lot of sectors that have fallen out of favor because of even some of the things I talk about in this book relating to the climate agenda that have become so hostile to certain forms of energy production in the United States that we're going to end up needing, okay? But in this temporary period have completely fallen out of favor because of the nature of climate change or cultural debates about it that have caused those sectors to fall out of favor. It might be an interesting place to look at technological development, at learning the language of that industry. I think you're seeing that in certain areas of biotech even, where a lot of publicly traded biotech companies right now even, and this happened in the early phase of when I entered biotech investing around 2008, 2009, you saw this. Companies with potentially valuable pipelines were trading close to cash. So the amount of cash in the bank that they had in their bank account was the entire publicly traded value of the company. Well, some of those companies might blow all that cash and go under. Some of them did. But if any of those companies has even a little bit of value to create, boy, you're really entering or joining that company as a employee that gets stock options, or as an investor that, per your example, you don't have cash to invest, but maybe that's the kind of company you could join and get equity in as an employee. Say you don't have to pay me cash, but I'll take equity. You get that equity at a low, what's called strike price, right, where that company's trading. If that company creates any value at all, it's just gravy on top of it, trading at just its cash value. There's a lot of those companies to look for. So that's an example of how you could apply the principle. But the broader principle is figure out where the pack is running, run the other way. You'll have the menu of options, and then find the one that best has your skill set match up to it. And you know what? That's a formula for blue sky wealth creation. You could be wealthier than I am, okay? It's just the right level of patience and the right level of willing to take that right bet. And some of it, some of it's a little bit of fortuitousness too. You can't deny that. But if you do it enough times over, it's not luck at that point. It's you actually seizing a contrarian destiny. And that's how you generate mass amounts of real liquid wealth.
Yeah, I mean, I based my stock investing strategy on Warren Buffett, and he has the term, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. So, for example,
it's classic.
When everyone hated Elon Musk when he was buying Twitter, the Tesla stock price started to plummet. Not because Tesla was doing bad, it was because people were mad at Elon Musk. So I bought a ton of Tesla stock. That stock has tripled since then. So
sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, so I understand what you're talking about. You want to get into areas where the price is below where it should be because everyone is fearful that this company is going to go bankrupt and so forth. Now, if I were to give you $10,000 right now, because this is an amount of money that I think a lot of my readers and viewers would kind of relate to. We're not talking about millions of dollars. $10,000, where would you put that money? In what stocks, or would you put in index funds or bonds, or where would you do it?
So what's the situation of the person who we're talking about here?
The situation we're talking about, because I think this is important when it comes to stock investing.
It really matters.
It definitely matters. And I've always said that whatever you invest in the stock market has to be an amount of money that you're not going to touch for at least a decade. You can't dip into it to pay your rent or food or whatever else. So this person has a stable job, and he or she has $10,000 put aside to invest, and they know they won't have to touch it anytime soon. Where would you put that money right now?
So if you're talking about the ultra long time horizon, right, where you're not going to have to need that money, a diversified basket of stocks is always where over a 40-year time frame, you're going to earn the maximal compounded investment return. This is what history teaches us. And do it in whatever's the lowest fee vehicle you're able to achieve that. I think that over a 40-year time horizon, that's been a time-proven strategy. Now, that's not the situation that many people are in. Many people may need some of that money much sooner than then, and then you start looking at, or may have lower appetites for risk, or somebody may be older and may actually rely on fixed income that comes in to actually live their life. Then you actually can't rely on stocks. You probably need to have bonds in your portfolio that actually pay that interest. So it all depends on the particular situation you're in. But apart from like the giving investment advice, put that to one side. You talk about just sort of as a student of history, right? As a student of economic history, in the long run, because it entails more risk, but also that's why it actually has to provide more return, investing in a diversified basket of equities over a 40-year time frame is going to be superior than allowing it to just sit in your bank account and collect cash. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I tell people, and me personally, my entire 401k is in the S&P 500. Now, when it comes to my personal stocks, I have 3 stocks that I put everything in. Everything is Google, Amazon, and Tesla. But when it comes to my retirement money, it's all S&P 500. And I think for me, that's a strategy that's worked well. But I think most people want like that hot stock tip. They want to put everything into a stock, and then when it doesn't do well, they think the whole thing is a scam, and they back away from it.
I would say that if you're in the market for a hot stock tip, here'd be my best advice to you. Seek a different paradigm.
Right.
Okay.
I agree.
Because you're asking the wrong question, right? That'd be my best piece of advice.
Exactly.
I could make a case for different stocks that I think, or even sectors that I think are undervalued right now. But the number one thing is if you're looking to, without that much disposable income sitting to one side and say, I need a hot stock tip to be able to make my way upward, I would say that you're asking the wrong question. Actually.
I agree. And, there's always been the arguments of stocks versus real estate. And historically, stocks have always done better than real estate when you look at the long-term appreciation. And I've always said that when you look at the Forbes list, everyone on that list is essentially there because of their stock holdings, whether it's stock in their own company or stocks in other companies that they've invested in. So as a billionaire, and we talked about this last time, where you are financially, what percentage of your wealth is in stocks versus real estate?
Overwhelmingly high in stocks, but that's just because of how I ended up generating my wealth, which is through companies that I've founded, actually, where I founded, have been CEO, or been in a core founder role that have ended up creating a lot of value. That ends up being disproportionately concentrated, and even a lot of the liquid wealth that I've had is also represented in diversified baskets of different kinds of securities that include stocks. And also, once you're at a certain level of needing added diversification, then you look at other kinds of assets as well. So there's some real estate, I'm in a unique position where most people can actually see what that looks like because having run for US president, that's actually publicly disclosed. I also think one of the areas where you're going to see more conventional mainstream wealth management wisdom go is to say that you want more uncorrelated assets in a portfolio. So you could have stocks, bonds, you could have, different types of even newer assets. You could have uncorrelated assets like, or at least in the future could be uncorrelated assets like exposure to crypto, like exposure to Bitcoin. And I think one of the things you see even in that world, you're going to see an evolution as well. In the Bitcoin world and in the crypto world, you have kind of a maximalist philosophy where it's like, okay, because I like this and then I'm going to go all in. Right. And I'm never going to sell, and I'm only going to be all in and put all of my assets there.
Right.
That ends up becoming a belief system versus where I think the world is actually going to go, which is one where you say, all right, there's portfolio theory that says you have diversified holdings of different types of securities. Where does crypto or Bitcoin fit in that? Is that going to be, should that be 100% of your portfolio? Almost certainly not. But could that be for the right person, 1 or 2 or 3% of your portfolio? But for tens of millions of Americans who haven't even thought about that in the past, I think that's going to be one of the developments we see over the next decade as well that I think is going to be pretty interesting.
What percentage of your portfolio is crypto?
I got to do the math right now and look at my exact numbers, but it would be it's a small portion of the total portfolio is the answer.
1%?
And I would say it's probably ends up being less than that because my holdings are so concentrated in the equity of the companies that I have founded And I tend to actually believe the most in the companies that I've founded, like most founders, and that's one way you actually really generate wealth is creating something of value that didn't exist and holding on to that all the way through the point where it actually appreciates. Even if you take some amounts, of liquidity along the way, as you see founders, do as companies go public and so on. In general, the way you generate massive amounts of wealth at the highest level. You talk about Elon with Tesla, you talk about Bill Gates with Microsoft. It is creating something of value and allowing that equity value to compound and appreciate. And so that ends up being a little bit different than people who have made their money through, income through a high earning job that then invests that. That tends to look a lot more spread out than a guy like me who's been a founder.
Yeah, I've always said that there's no such thing as a middle class. There's just rich and poor. And the difference between those two is that rich people take a significant percentage of their earnings and then invest those earnings, and those earnings start to make money on their own and they compound over time. Poor people, regardless of how much they make per year, spend the money they make and live paycheck to paycheck. Now, someone making 150, 200,000 could be poor if they're living a lavish lifestyle and basically living on the edge. So my whole thing is that if you don't invest money and utilize compound interest, you're gonna have to work until you die. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I would also just add one more dimension because there's two kinds of rich people. And I think that this opens up for the people who are in the poor people bucket to actually be able to have a choice between these two other paths, right? The one kind of rich person is the hired rich person. I mean, these might be CEOs who are making tens of millions of dollars a year, but it's still a hired hand, a very expensive hired hand. Investment bankers, people work on Wall Street, et cetera. That's one type of rich person. There's the other type of rich person who's in the creator class, which is different than the managerial class. The creator class is somebody who creates equity value by creating something that does not exist in the world. And so I think that takes a lot less financial capital in general, but it takes more ideational capital. And so I think there are a couple of different paths, and not everybody's cut out to be one of those things or the other. But I don't think it's just like one category of rich people. The people in the managerial class are very different than the people who are in the creator class. And I have kind of a unique experience of having lived in both of those worlds, or at least having had enough of a taste of all three categories, right? I grew up in Southwest Ohio as the kid of legal immigrants who came here with no money, legal immigrants, but no money or minimal money. Then I ended up getting a hired for salary job that ended up being, over time, a very high paying job, but it was still a salaried job where you're not the owner. You're not the person who has uncapped upside. You're the guy, if you do a good job, you get a paycheck that's bigger than I would have ever imagined growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but it's still a paycheck. And then you have the creator class of actually creating companies, which is what I've been doing in the later phase of my life before I entered politics. That's really was none of the amount of money that I earned over nearly a decade of being the high salaried worker in the hedge fund world. It pales in comparison. It's not, it's a lot of money, more than my parents ever would have imagined anyone in our family making. But it is a pittance compared to what you actually create by creating something that does not exist in the world and owning that equity value. And then there's the tax system that also actually rewards that latter form over the former form too, because that latter form, if you're getting a paycheck, even if it's a really big paycheck, you're paying taxes on that cash year to year, but equity value appreciates without being taxed year on year. That could change.
Yeah,
that could change if Kamala Harris becomes president, because one of the things she wants to do is to implement, and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and a lot of Democrats, agree or not, you may agree or not with the policy, but they would say that those people in the creator class or the equity holding class should pay taxes every year on a portion of their equity value. But the problem is that then requires them to sell the shares in the companies they've created even before they otherwise want to sell, which would trigger a cycle of forced selling. That could actually cause a stock market crash.
Yeah.
The irony is the people who are in that category are actually still going to be fine. They're still going to have big houses at the end of it. But the stock market crash is going to hurt the person who has the $10,000 that was investing in that diversified portfolio that you and I talked about. And if you have that tax on unrealized gains, then my answer to your earlier question might actually change, where my answer may not be to put that money in the diversified stock market anymore, if that's going to be something that the government decides they want to crash. So that kind of ties up our whole discussion in one loop right there.
Yeah, I am absolutely terrified. If I got taxed on my stock portfolio before I actually had to sell it, oh my God, I'd probably move out of the country before that happened.
And imagine if it wasn't even your liquid stock portfolio, but now they say this business you're owning and operating or whatever is the government says it has a huge amount of value. You don't even have the cash to pay that tax, but you'll still have to owe it. And so you're going to have to sell something else. When you sell something else, that drives down the price. You got 300 million other people doing the same thing. That's a formula for a crash.
Right.
So I personally think that put the rest of the politics to one side. If you're a single issue voter on the economy, and if your audience, you're telling me is an audience that cares about generating great personal wealth, which I think that you should never have to apologize for. America, you want to live the American dream, you go do it. And I think that's the beauty of this country. That's, I think, one of the dangers that hasn't really been talked about as a hot issue in this election. People talk about every other fringe item. This is right close to the flame for people like you. And I think it's a pretty important issue.
Yeah, I don't see that ever happening. I understand that Kamala.
People say that, but she's proposed this for the last 3 years.
Yes, I know she proposed it, and I think that a certain, a large portion of her audience, her voting audience, is the eat the rich, kind of audience who wants to see rich people, like the Occupy Wall Street types and so forth, wants to see them burn and, lose all their money. But realistically, if you start to tax people's stock portfolios, it would create ultimate chaos, financial chaos. I'm talking about a crash.
It's financial Armageddon.
Yeah, it's financial Armageddon. This is like, it will never happen.
This is like the asteroids hitting the dinosaurs level. Okay,
exactly.
That's what this looks like.
I agree with you,
and I know you get that. I know you understand that.
I completely get that. But honestly, I think it's too drastic of a concept for it to ever happen. That's what I think. I
think we're playing with fire. If you're saying that, okay, she's telling you, she's told you for 3 years that this is what she supports. They put it in the budget. She's telling you now she's for it. She was for it in 2020. Put her in office and she's not really going to do it. I don't know. I think you're playing with fire if you care about the amount of money in your bank account. If that's what matters to you, I'd be very careful with that bet. I obviously prefer to go in the other way on this election. But I will tell you this too, is we do have this culture that's hostile to success in the country right now. And I don't think we should make people flog themselves or apologize for their achievements, for generating wealth. I think that's what America was built on. And you shouldn't have to apologize for your success. I want more people to be able to enjoy that success. That's the kind of country we want to create. And you're a great example of that, man. You're an American dream story. I'm proud to say the American dream exists. I know it exists because I've lived it. It's real. Yeah. But I want to make that accessible to more people rather than penalizing those who actually succeed in achieving it for themselves.
You called Alex Soros, who's the son of billionaire George Soros, a puppet for hosting Tim Walz.
And can I just pause right there 1 second? Because actually it just ties to our last question. Okay. So you said the Democrats are like, they're against the party of the rich. But then you got this like ultra rich guy who's now, effectively subsidizing the entire Democratic Party. The way I would summarize it is it's like a bunch of rich people telling poor people that it's other rich people that are responsible for their problems while they're actually getting rich while actually preaching them that same message. That's what I see in the modern Democratic Party, actually.
Okay. So why the shot at Alex Soros?
Well, I am disgusted by this across the political spectrum. I called it out from the Republican debate stage too. You'll remember this last year if you were watching closely. I don't like it when billionaires use politicians as their puppets. And anybody who's watching this program right now, just go look at the photographs that Tim Walz posted from his visit with Alex Soros. Just look at the photographs and tell me what you see. What I see, and I think it's clear as day, like if you're literally watching this right now, just if you could actually do it in your feed as this video goes live, post the images of Tim Walz standing next to Alex Soros. It literally looks like there's a puppet master wielding his puppet. And that's exactly the way politics, frankly, has worked for so long in both political parties. But the fact that it's working that way now in the Democratic Party is doubly ironic because they're the ones who supposedly care about blasting the rich. Here's what ends up happening. They only blast the rich, but the rich people who are at the front of the line and controlling the strings carve out exceptions for themselves. So the rules they write don't actually affect them. You don't even talk about this tax on unrealized capital gains. Here's why they're not worried about it. There's going to be a million exceptions that people who are well off are going to be able to pay some accounting firm to be able to engineer around. But it's going to be people like you that are actually going to be the ones who are left holding the bag. So that's what irritates me the heck out of a system where the people we elect to run the government, many cases are just puppets for the people who provide their mother's milk. That's the money needed to fund these political campaigns. And that image of Tim Walz standing next to him, that picture could tell you more than I could say in 1,000 words. Just show it to the audience, and I think that'll tell the story.
I mean, I'm looking at the pictures. It looks like two guys hanging out with each other.
I don't know about that. Let your audience be the judge. I mean, it's symbolic. It'd be one thing if it was just a bad picture, right? But it's another if it actually captures the essence of what's happening, which we know is happening. Is it happening in both parties? I'll be the first to admit it. Of course it is. I said the same thing when I ran on the Republican side last year. But I don't think that Alex Soros's say about climate change policy or about injustice or criminal justice reform or about what even economic policy should be or what our border policy should be should matter any more than anybody else listening to this program. I think as citizens, all of our voices should count equally. And the fact that the system doesn't work that way is, I think, a failure of American democracy. And the irony is Democrats used to criticize this in the past, right? Back in Citizens United in 2010, they say corporations are not people. Well, now they've abandoned that ideology and actually are raising far more concentrated money from mega billionaire donors than even Republicans are. And so I'm not saying that just to dunk on Democrats. It's a systemic change that's required across the political system. But yes, when you have the guy who's, has at least have a 45% chance of being the next vice president, supplicating before a multi-billionaire who rails against other billionaires while actually being one that exploits the system, I think it is something that deserved to be called out. And that's just what I did with the slight joke that I posted saying it looked like you could see the puppet master pulling the strings.
One of the things you talk about in your book is reverse racism is racism.
Right, it's one of the chapters in the book. Yeah.
Correct. You said the modern race activists claim that the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, directly flouts the legal prohibitions in the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. You also said something interesting in this chapter. Let me see where this part is. You said, by institutionalizing anti-white and anti-Asian racism, affirmative action also fosters a greater degree of anti-Black and anti-Hispanic racism. There's no better way to get someone to become a racist than to take something away from them on the basis of their own skin color.
Yeah. And it's really sad to see that happen. So I wrote my first book on this subject. It's my first book, but it included this subject several years ago. So Woke Inc. was that book. I published that about 4 years ago. Okay. I wrote it 4 years ago, published it in 2021. I predicted in that book that a lot of these reverse racism policies, these anti-racist policies, would fuel a reactionary backlash of anti-Black racism in the country. I'm probably alone amongst most conservatives saying this, but I'm going to call it like I see it. I do think in the last year, we have seen a real uptick of racism. And I'm not talking about the anti-white, anti-Asian racism, though that exists too. I'm talking about anti-Black racism in the country in a way that I've never seen. I went to Springfield, I told you last week, okay? When I went to Springfield, there was a Black man who came up, he asked a question. He wasn't Haitian, he's just Black American, American-born for many generations. Comes to the mic and says, you know what? I could tell you on the number of instances I've actually encountered somebody being racist to my face in my entire life. In the first 30 years of my life, I could count on one hand or less. In the last 3 months, I've been called the N-word twice. And that didn't, you know what the saddest part of that is, Vlad? It didn't surprise me, right? We are seeing a reactionary wave of racism. And the reason is there is no better way to fuel racial animus than to take something else of value away from somebody else based on their skin color. And that's exactly what we've done with a lot of these affirmative act policies, some of them well-intentioned. But even good policies, even good and well-intentioned policies can be bad policies with bad outcomes. And I'm not saying this now as like I'm just inventing this after the fact. You can go look up my book from 4 years ago predicting exactly that man's experience in Springfield. That's exactly what we're seeing today. And it makes me sad because it's right when we are close to, I'm not saying it's perfect, but right when we got closest to reaching Martin Luther King's promised land. It's right then that we started adopting these most vigorous anti-racist policies that are refueling the very kind of racism that we thought we were in the fight to get over. And so I think the right answer is the best way to end discrimination on the basis of race, which I want to do, is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. I think we still have a chance to do it. I'm a little bit worried that we're pouring kerosene, especially in times where people are economically challenged and facing hardship. People tend to be prone to negative social emotions if their economic conditions are tough. I worry about where we are, but I don't think that we have lost our way permanently. It doesn't have to stay that way. I think it's important for us to have leaders at every level, from top to bottom and bottom to top, who are willing to say, you know what? We see our fellow citizen as that, our fellow American, regardless of their skin color, and we're going to achieve once and for all, not like I'm saying we have had it in the past, but once and for all, a true meritocracy where your skin color, whatever it is, isn't going to hold you back from getting a spot at a university, getting a job that you want to get, and that whatever your God-given potential is, you have the ability to achieve it in this country without any man or system standing in your way. That's the true American dream. And I think that we still can achieve it. But in some ways, it's sad that we've taken a step back because of these so-called anti-racist policies.
Yeah, I just feel that right now, the level of people being accused of racism is on a level that I've never seen in my entire life. You know, I had a situation earlier in the year where I went on Twitter, and this was during the whole Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef. Kendrick dropped a song, Not Like Us. It was a very, very early version of the song where it wasn't mixed very well. And later on, the engineer even said how, you know, Kendrick wanted me to just throw it out real quick and we fixed it up later on. I made a comment saying that the mix quality of Kendrick's new song takes away from the impact of the song. I got a response from a female Black Princeton professor that said, "You are white. This is a Black discussion. You're not allowed to be included in this." I responded to her in shock and basically said, I can't believe that someone from Princeton is saying something that's so bigoted when you have students who are of, you know, various races in your class, and I tagged Princeton and so forth. Now, at the time that I'm saying it, I'm thinking I'm debating with a Princeton professor. But the way this played out as it went super viral and was on Reddit's front page and got tens of millions of impressions was this white man is trying to get a Black female professor fired. To me, I'm not thinking she's a Black female. I'm thinking this is a Princeton professor who should be able to debate high-level concepts of people commenting on various pieces of art, regardless of what their skin color is. But it got played out as Vlad is a racist, and he's trying to get this Black woman fired from her good job. Ultimately, I had to apologize. And I said, listen, I wasn't actually trying to get her fired. I didn't report her. I apologize for tagging her job in my responses and so forth. I was wrong for that because no one should get fired from their job based on a Twitter debate. But the fact that I was suddenly labeled as a racist when I'm speaking to a Princeton professor, you know, one of the greatest universities in the world, really was a wake-up call about how I need to keep my mouth shut more often. And when it comes to race, anything that even comes close to the fringes of that is going to usually play out badly.
I think I love it. I love the way you describe that, including your charitable instinct to say that, okay, even if somebody says one bad thing on Twitter, we're making a mistake if we're making major life course changes for that person by judging them by their worst moment on the internet, which is, by the way, designed to pull the worst out of you.
Right.
I appreciate you having the mental space to do that while still being able to express your irritation and your disagreement with this individual. I think we need more of that, Grace. And I'm confident we can get there, but I think it is going to take all of us recognizing that have we been perfect in getting to where we are? No. But I think I said this last time you and I spoke, and I'm going to say it again now because it's important. I would still rather live in a country that has ideals and falls short of them than one that has no ideals at all. You can only be a hypocrite if you have ideals. And the United States of America wasn't founded on perfection, but we are founded on the pursuit of a more perfect union. That's one of the things that I hit in the last chapter of the book as well, is we would do well to actually study our own history, the actual history. We have a lot to be proud of in that history. It's about the pursuit of a more perfect union, and we're still part of that history now. It was Malcolm X who actually famously said, a nation without knowledge of its history is like a tree without roots. It is dead. Right? And I think that what I see in the country right now, I worry about that, because you see a generation, and probably most people, even of older generations, losing their appreciation for American history. And to understand where we are, we have to understand how we got to where we are, whether that's you in your individual life or whether that's a nation in its life. That's one of the things I try to do in this book, man, is to provide some of that perspective of history, both in my own personal journey, but our national journey, and understanding our present through the lens of the past. And I think that's going to be our best way of making clear-sighted decisions for the future. And, the book is called Truths for a reason. I think we get to truth through free speech and open debate. And that's the whole premise of this book. And I'm glad you and I were able to do this. I appreciate you bringing me on in the context of the book, because I don't just, as I said, want a bunch of standard Republican audiences to read this book and agree with me. I want to reach people who may have different thoughts. I mean, a lot of your audience may agree with me, but a lot of them may not. But my goal in writing this book was to write it and present it in a way that whether or not you agree with me, I hope you're still able to take something away from it that enriches the dinner table debates and conversations you're able to have. And so if your audience, does take the time to check out Truths, it's, I gotta say, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's been #1 on Amazon all week. It's the #1 bestseller on Amazon this week. So I'm not in this to sort of sell, and believe me, if you're asking about advice on making money, selling books is not the way to do it, okay? I promise you that. I promise you that is not the way to do it. But I am in this to spread the ideas, and so I would be immensely gratified if your audience, not only read the book, but gave you the feedback such that the next time you and I sit down, which I do hope is in person, third time's the charm, as we said, that you're able to challenge me with not only your reactions, but what some of your audience's reactions are to this book. And I think it's going to be conversations like that that help us get our country back.
Well, Vivek, always a pleasure when we sit down. And congratulations on, Truths being the #1 bestseller. I read through it. I don't agree with everything, which I've been vocal about. And that's fine. That's the whole purpose of creating pieces of content like this. It's supposed to create a certain level of debate and so forth. But I think you're able to actually back up all your points. And although we're not on the same page about everything, I respect your opinion. And, I definitely recommend all my viewers to go check out your book and come to their own conclusion.
I appreciate that, man. And I enjoyed our conversation for the same reason. And let's do it again.
Let's do it. Until next time.
Take
Peace.
care. Bye.